Stevens.
Well, thank you, Mr. Stringer. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair. And I remember the last time we had a similar debate like this, it was chaired by the great Sir David Amess, who we all miss in this House. And of course, in that particular debate, I was the voice of reason against many Conservative backbenchers as they gave a description of the immigration system which, frankly, I don't recognise. And whilst I congratulate the Honourable Member for Morley and Outwood for securing this debate, I'm afraid much of what she said I do not recognise at all. I do not recognise the notion that immigration ministers, past and present, are some sort of lily-livered liberals. It's just not been my experience that that's the case, and I certainly did not like the references to Home Office staff being soft touches and the criticisms of them. I'm afraid I'm going to defend Home Office staff for the work they do. I've always found them firm and fair. They have a regular weekly telephone call with the Constituency Office of Glasgow South West, as they do with other members of Parliament, to discuss cases and where they are. And we have a system which ministers have put in place for members of the House to raise these sorts of cases and what cases should go where, and whether, if there are concerns that we have, and I will be mentioning one today, that we can raise those directly with ministers. Mr Stringer, I take the view that no human being is illegal, and so I think the discourse of this debate, concerns me on occasion when we discuss immigration. I had the great privilege last week of chairing the annual general meeting of the Show Racism and the Red Card all-party parliamentary group, where we had a number of children from London and Nottingham and other places in which they described the importance of having anti-racism education in our education systems across these islands, because I do think that members of this House could learn from some education, and perhaps we should have Show Racism and Red Card coming into these debates, explaining in simple terms the difference between an asylum seeker, a refugee and an economic migrant, because I think that there are occasions in which those who are seeking sanctuary in these islands are being referred to as illegal or migrants, and I think that that is a charge which is completely and utterly unfair. And I don't like this phrase, illegal immigration. You know, if you close off all the legal and safe routes to arrive in the United Kingdom, then you can't complain that someone who's genuinely seeking sanctuary then has to find another place. But what I do find most troubling of all is that the whole discourse of this debate is always focused on the exploited and not the exploiter. And I think that there has to be more of a discussion about how we actually tackle the gangmasters and the criminal gangs. We spent months discussing the Rwanda policy and the Rwanda bill. There was nothing in that legislation that talked about tackling gangmasters and criminal gangs. And I think that that is the source of the problem. And I know it's the source of the problem because I have a constituent in Glasgow who was told he was going to be sent to Canada. He thought he was going to arrive in Canada and he ended up in Glasgow. Now, there are huge, great links between two great nations of Scotland and Canada, but that tells you that there are people, gangmasters and criminal gangs, who are at it here, and they're the ones that I think we need to focus on a lot more in this debate, and not those who are seeking sanctuary to be with their families, because many of those who are arriving in these shores have already family across these islands. And as the small boats continue, the entire asylum system must be questioned for value for money and effectiveness. And I do think there are some issues which I do want to raise in this debate, some of which I have raised with the Minister before, and he can obviously predicted before this debate some of the issues I'm going to raise, and one of them is asylum accommodation. And I do think, you know, this nonsensical position where hotels are being used, barges are being used, military sites are being used, I think is something which I have great difficulty with. And the Minister knows that I had a meeting with him a couple of weeks ago, along with my honourable friend for Glasgow North, where we do need to think about these issues a lot more. We do need to think about when a backlog is cleared, that thousands of people are given refugee status at the same time, and what that means to local authorities. And I do think we need to encourage local authorities to take more of those who are seeking sanctuary in these islands, but the Home Office needs to do more to negotiate with those local authorities. Because it can't just say to a local authority, you take more on, when the local authority will say, well, that's fine, then tell us what money we're getting, because we'll need to think through what that means for our health and social care system, for example, our education system, and all of those issues. And there is still, I'm afraid to say, Mr Stringer, a legacy backlog. I know there's still a legacy backlog. We were told that every person that had submitted a claim before the 28th of June 2022 had received a decision. I know for a fact that's not the case, and I'm going to raise that case later on. I also would ask the Minister if he could tell us, I don't expect him to have this figure in front of us now, but I have a concern that we know that taxi companies are transporting asylum seekers all over these islands on occasion. There was one occasion last week, for example, where a family based in Glasgow, a Glasgow Airport Hotel, were transported from Glasgow to Bradford and just told when they arrived for their interview, you're now being moved to Bradford. And then what happens is that it's a taxi cost. They're then put in a taxi, and a Glasgow taxi sends them to Bradford. That must have an effect on the taxpayer, as the Honourable Member for Morley Outwood says. But I would like to know how much the Home Office is paying taxi companies in transporting asylum seekers across these islands from Glasgow to Bradford or Glasgow to Manchester or wherever, because I do think that's a nonsensical position, Mr Stringer. If you have asylum seekers based in Glasgow, then why are they being transported all over the UK at sometimes a moment's notice? So I would like an answer to that question, and I hope the Minister will commit to writing to all of us who have contributed to this debate this afternoon what that cost actually is. Now, I want to raise, it was raised by the Honourable Member, the gimmick that is the Rwanda policy. And I have to say, if I was a member of a political party contesting the local elections last week, Mr Stringer, I would have objected to this PR stunt that we saw last week in that Home Office video of transporting those into detention only days before the polls opened in some parts of the UK. I hope that Labour colleagues and others are checking the purdah rules in relation to that publicity. But I do want to ask the Minister is that I have raised with his department why a constituent of Glasgow South West was detained last week. Because under the Home Office's own guidance, it says that those who submitted a claim before the 28th of June 2022 would be dealt with as a legacy claim. That individual should have had a decision on the 31st of December 2023 under the government's own policy. He did not. He has not had a decision at all. So he's not had a negative decision or a positive decision. He arrived for a standard interview last Tuesday, a standard interview to be met with 8 police officers who then bundled him into a police van. He was then bundled into an immigration van, a Home Office van, and taken to Collinbrook because he's been told he is being detained. He has family here. So I would like to know, Minister, why those who have a legacy claim, who have been waiting years on the decision, are now being told they're being transported to Rwanda, because that's not what the guidance of the Home Office is telling MPs. And when I raised it with one of the parliamentary private secretaries, they sent me the guidance which says that that should not be the case. And so I do have serious questions, Mr Stringer, about the application of that policy and the way it's been applied at the moment. People are waiting years on decisions. I at least agree with the Honourable Lady on that front, and I think that that is taking too long. And I would like to see more staff at the Home Office. If that's what it takes to employ more staff, then I think that's right. In closing, Mr Stringer, I did object to the Honourable Lady's description of the civil service, and I'll refer to my register of members' interests as chair of the PCS parliamentary group. I think the trade unions are absolutely correct and have the duty to their members if they think that piece of legislation breaks human rights or international law. I don't share this view, incidentally, that the whole legal profession is somehow left-wing and Marxist. If only that was true, Mr Stringer, perhaps the legal profession would be in a better place. But I completely reject that on behalf of the legal profession. We have very good lawyers out there, and I think to tar them with this brush that are somehow Marxist is extraordinary. You would think, listening to that debate, that when the judge rises, that Bandea Rosa, the first two verses, are sung in court rather than anything else. So, and I'll just leave that vision with the opposition frontbench spokesperson, who is perhaps thinking about that in his head. But can I say in all seriousness, trade unions have the right to take to court an issue on behalf of their members. And I think they also have the right, Mr Stringer, to have discussions with the Home Office, when the Home Office tell them that they're going to send civil servants to Rwanda to work, and what that means for them and the consequences for their lives and their jobs. So in closing, Mr Stringer, I think what we need is a sensible immigration policy, one that's built on dignity, one that allows genuine cases to come here, to share with their families, and give them the right to work after 6 months. The government is, in fairness to it, going some way along that with its short occupational lists and all of them. I think that I would want to see that built on. But we need fairness and sensible policies when it comes to immigration policy.